You might be tempted to fill every crack in your driveway, but doing so at the wrong time or in the wrong way could end up making things a lot worse. Also, so could not doing it when you should. So this video is going to tell you the things that you need to know before you fill the cracks in your driveway. So first things first, we need to know the difference between structural cracks and cosmetic cracks, because that makes a big difference on how you fill them, when you fill them, or even really if you fill them. Little hairline cracks, especially ones that kind of spiderweb out and don't follow really kind of a direct path, those tend to be more cosmetic cracks. Now, those kind of cracks in the very beginning, when your driveway is brand new, if you start to see some of those cracks forming, most of the time, it's gonna be safe to leave them alone. A lot of the time, as the driveway settles, those cracks the concrete will end up kind of leveling itself back out, and those cracks will pretty much disappear. And filling them too early could cause bigger problems down the road. But cracks that are wider, quarter-inch wide cracks, cracks that are deeper, cracks where the ground becomes uneven as a result, or that follow a straight line, those tend to be more structural cracks, and those may be cracks that are worth filling, but oftentimes need a little bit of other pre-work first, and filling them too early could also make things worse. It's also important to note the location of your cracks within a slab. If they're near the edge, if they're in the middle, if they're in an area where water pools, and we'll come back to those things a little bit later. Number 2, let's consider how old your driveway is. If your driveway's pretty new, like it's a new house, or it was poured recently, you've got a new driveway, some of those early cracks, those cosmetic ones, could kind of disappear on their own. And what's happening right now is that the driveway is settling just a little bit. And that's totally normal. Concrete is heavy. We pour it, and really, if you're prepping for it right, there shouldn't be a lot of settling because you're preparing the ground underneath the concrete. So it shouldn't move a whole lot, but a little bit of movement's normal. And so as it kind of settles normally over those first few years, a lot of those early little hairline cracks will sort of disappear because it'll level back out. And if it's been a few years and you still have those cosmetic cracks, then we may want to deal with them. That leads me to the third point, which we alluded to earlier. We need to consider the environment that this concrete is in. A driveway that's outdoors is going to be very different from a garage floor or a basement floor or a first level floor if you're on a slab foundation, where it's an indoor climate controlled, not so humid, not wet environment. Or if you live in a climate that doesn't really get that cold, it's gonna be very different from those of us who live in an environment where we go from hot summers to really cold, freezing winters. If you have kind of stronger cycles, because you live in an environment that has those freeze-thaw cycles, then we want to be really, really careful with cracks, because little cracks, especially if they're in areas where water pools in the driveway, like kind of a low spot, you get water pooling, filling in those cracks at all, that water goes in those cracks, and if it freezes, those cracks expand and they get worse. Likewise, if you have a driveway that's right next to trees and you have roots that are encroaching in on that driveway, you could end up having them lift your driveway several inches and causing substantial cracks. So consider the environment, consider the things causing those cracks. If you have something that's going to continue to cause the cracking to get worse over time, then we're gonna need to deal with it. If you got a tree with a root extending out, we might need to remove that root that's near the surface. Because even if we try to fill that crack, or if we end up with an uneven surface and we grind down the high spot, whatever, that's not gonna last. It's just gonna keep getting worse. Likewise, if we have big freeze-thaw cycles and you have little cracks, those cracks could just grow and grow and grow. So those cracks might be worth filling. Next, we got to consider the right way to fill the cracks. If we're talking about those large structural cracks, which are usually due to environmental factors like a root that's changing the ground underneath the driveway, or due to settling, the ground underneath the driveway, again, has changed, then we have to deal with that in a much more substantial way. In many cases, we need to mitigate that issue so it stops causing a bigger problem. So if you have a bit of a void under the concrete, you can tap on the concrete with a hammer or something and you can hear if it's kind of hollow underneath, it means that we've got a low spot, a void, and that is just gonna keep wanting to sink. And so sometimes we actually need to get under and we need to fill that with some base material so that it doesn't continue to sink. Sometimes we end up with cracks that started out cosmetic, they just kind of expand, but over time, they've reached a point where they are kind of staying the same. They're not really growing anymore. At that point, if it's a larger crack, you might want to fill it in a similar way that you would a large structural crack, which once we've dealt with the issue, usually means using like a powdered, where you mix it with water. It's more like a cement or an epoxy-based material that we literally fill in the crack and kind of push it in. Almost like a putty, but then it hardens, like it's a mortar. That's gonna give more structural stability, rigidity. It's gonna give you can get a smooth finish so it looks more like the concrete did in the first place. And that's great as well if you're gonna ever kind of resurface the whole thing, then you could reach a point where you can't even tell there was ever a crack there. But for smaller hairline cracks, where we're just kind of trying to fill it, we're trying to prevent it from getting worse, from water getting in there, a lot of times those are gonna be great to fill with more of like a silicone-based, waterproof type filling. Something that's almost more like a caulk. There are flexible sealants that are specifically made for fixing concrete, and use the right one. Some are made for filling cracks, some are made for filling kind of the gaps between, in your driveway, you've got kind of multiple slabs, right? And they have an expansion joint in between. If you were in a situation where you wanted to fill that with a waterproof filler, you can use a flexible sealant that will just kind of fill that gap, but it allows for that expansion and contraction. And that's the real reason to use flexible sealants, is because it allows for a little bit of movement to continue on. If you fill a crack with a sealer that becomes rigid, then any movement is just gonna lead to those cracks returning. Next, we need to consider the preparation and the timing of when we're gonna do the repair. We talked about fixing the underlying issue. Sometimes that means getting under the concrete, often by lifting up that section of the slab, just lifting it up a bit, and then being able to prep the space underneath with the right underlayment to prevent it from settling so much. But it also means considering the timing. Usually filling concrete cracks when it's really cold outside is not a good idea. Usually we want to do it when the temperature is fairly moderate, unless you're using a product that's specifically designed for cold weather use. So choose a time where it's a little bit more middle of the road, where the temperature is closer to the average of what you're going to get throughout the year, and when it's probably not going to be raining within a few hours. The proper prep and timing of fixing your concrete crack is just as important as the material you use to do the repair. So when you're looking at cracks in your concrete, inspect them, evaluate them, and figure out what's the right type of filler to use to repair this crack, and determine whether or not right now is a good time to repair this crack. Again, new concrete, maybe let's leave it for now and let the settling sort of finish. Keep track of those cracks over time and see if they continue to expand, if they continue to grow, get worse. And if so, we want to consider kind of the structural cause of that. In many cases, it's going to be best to sort of wait until the crack stops getting worse, because that's when the settling is done. But in some cases, if it's getting worse, it may be being caused by that freeze-thaw cycle, in which case we want to deal with it as soon as possible. So a little bit of troubleshooting is really important here. So evaluate, consider the right material, consider the right timing. Rushing in and doing this with the wrong filler at the wrong time could end up costing you a lot more later, and could end up with a pretty nasty, ugly looking patch job. Next, in another video, I'm gonna show you actually how to do some of these repairs. There are different types of concrete repairs depending on the type of situation. So we'll dive into that further. When I have that video made, it'll go over here. Until then, I want you to check out the other videos on this channel, because they're super helpful in helping you solve your own problems in your own home, save a boatload of money, and do things the right way the first time, so you don't have to spend as much time or as much money trying to get it right. We'll see you all next time.